Welcome back once again in the lecture series by Professor Anuradha Jain. Today in this presentation we are going to discuss about foreign exchange rate and foreign exchange market. Foreign exchange rate is the rate at which one currency is exchanged for the other currencies, and the foreign exchange market decides the exchange rate on the basis of demand and supply of the currency in the market. The rate of exchange of any currency reflects the standing of the country in the world economy. Now, if there is more demand of the currency in the international market, that will lead to the increase in the exchange rate or value of the currency in terms of other currency. So therefore, exchange rate becomes very important, and even exchange rate also affects the balance of payment also, because that decides the exports and imports of the country, and it's cause and effect of each other, because exchange rate affects the exports and imports, and exports and imports also affects the exchange rate. So in this presentation we are going to discuss about what exchange rate exactly is, how it is decided, what are the factors that decides the demand for the currency in the international market, and how it is decided, what are the different systems of the exchange rate determination. Like earlier we used to have fixed exchange rate system, and then after that India adopted the dual exchange rate system, where 40% and 60% ratio was there for fixed and flexible exchange rate. And now at present we have adopted the system of flexible exchange rate, where market only decides the exchange rate, just like the price of any other commodity. So let us come and discuss the concept in detail. By definition, the exchange rate is the rate at which currency of a country can be exchanged for one another. In simple words, exchange rate is the price of one currency in terms of the other currency. Like for example, like an Indian citizen suppose imports Mercedes car from US, then he or she will have to pay Mercedes company in terms of US dollar and not in terms of Indian rupees. So the importer will have to acquire US dollars from the exchange market for the purpose of making the payment for this imported car. The price of the US dollar in terms of the Indian rupee is given in the exchange market. So to acquire US dollar, a person will have to exchange the Indian currency for the US dollar in the exchange market, and the price that the Indian citizen pays for each US dollar in the rupee is known as the rupee dollar exchange rate. And for example, like at present if you see, then the Indian rupee dollar exchange rate is 1:76.07, or you can say that $1 $1 is equal to 76 rupees around approximately. And every country is supposed to calculate exchange rate of their currency in terms of all other foreign currency. The foreign exchange market conditions are not static. They are subject to the change in the changing conditions of domestic and external economic. So therefore, market determined exchange rate is subject to the change depending upon various factors. So following are the factors that you can see that lead to the change in the exchange rate. Like suppose for example, first one is the change in domestic price. A change in domestic price, foreign prices remaining constant, change the demand and supply condition of foreign exchange. Like for example, a rise in the domestic price in India, all other things remaining the constant, reduces foreign demand for Indian goods and increases India's demand for foreign goods. Why? Because exports become costlier here and imports becomes cheaper comparative to the domestic products. Now consequently, India's imports increases, causing an increase in the demand for foreign exchange and an upward shift in the India's demand curve. Now for the same reason, India's exports decreases, causing a leftward shift in the foreign exchange supply curve. So both these changes cause a change in the exchange rate. Another factor can be like trade effect or terms of trade effect. Like when a country has a favorable balance of trade, the supply of foreign currency would be more than its demand in the domestic market, resulting in the rise in the value of currency in terms of the foreign currency. So, on the contrary, if the countries has a unfavorable balance of trade, the foreign exchange received in payment for the exports would be inadequate for paying the imports. So, this may be the result of a rise in the domestic price and cost of production, raising the demand for foreign goods. Now, here the demand for foreign exchange would be greater than the supply, raising the value of foreign currency in terms of national currency. Then another factor can be the rate of interest. Now, if the rate of interest in the domestic economy rises in relation to the interest rate in the foreign country, the capital inflow increases and outflow decreases. Now, under this situation, the supply of foreign exchange has a tendency to exceed the demand for the same. Now, as a result, the value of foreign exchange falls. A fall in domestic rate of interest will have reverse impact on the exchange rate. Another reason can be like political condition, like instability in political condition will also change the exchange rate, like wars, atmosphere of Cold War or civil war, anarchy in particular countries, industrial unrest, exchange controls, restriction on movements of capital between the nations, etc., are some important political factors resulting in fluctuations in the exchange rate. And such changes are unpredictable and influence pattern as well as the direction of foreign trade. So, such effects have unfavorable climate for inflow of capital and reducing the supply of foreign currency. Structural change can also be very important factor for a change in the exchange rate, like a change in technology, the invention of new products or such during changing the pattern of comparative advantage influences the exchange rate of the country. So, such structural change affect the consumer's demand of that country, causing a change in the value of its currency. So, therefore, we can see that there are various factors which can lead to the exchange rate, and therefore, we can say that exchange rate is not static, it is not fixed, it is flexible depending upon the demand and supply of the foreign exchange in the foreign exchange market. As discussed in the earlier slide, that foreign exchange rate is not static and it keep on changing with the change in the market demand and supply of that currency. So, whenever there is a change in the exchange rate, then that term that we use is known as depreciation or appreciation. Currency depreciation refers to the decrease in the value of domestic currency in terms of foreign currency. So, it makes domestic goods cheaper in foreign country as more and more of goods can now be purchased with the same amount of foreign currency. So, it leads to increase in the exports. On the other hand, currency appreciation refers to the increase in the value of domestic currency in terms of foreign currency. So, it makes foreign goods cheaper in domestic country as more and more goods can now be purchased with the same amount of domestic currency. So, it leads to increase in the imports. The foreign exchange market refers to the organizational setup under which foreign currencies are bought and sold by the buyers and sellers. So, the buyers and sellers includes like central bank, commercial banks, foreign exchange brokers, business firms, exporters, importers, etc. Like any other market, foreign exchange market is a system and not a particular place. So, the market system works through the roles played and facilities provided by the key players of the market like foreign exchange brokers, commercial banks, central bank. The other players of the market include like exporters, importers, investor, tourists, immigrants, etc. And the main functions of foreign exchange market includes like transfer function, credit function and hedging function. Mainly there are two kinds of foreign exchange markets. that is spot market and forward market. The spot market refers to that segment of the foreign exchange market in which sale and purchase of foreign currency are settled within 2 days of the deal. The spot sale and purchase of foreign exchange make the spot market. So, the rate at which foreign currency is bought and sold in the spot market is known as the spot exchange rate. For all practical purposes, spot rate is treated as the current exchange rate. Now, the forward exchange market refers to the deals for sales and purchase of a foreign currency at some future date at a pre-settled exchange rate. So, when buyers and seller enters an agreement to buy and sell a foreign currency after 90 days of the deal, it is called forward transaction. The forward transaction in foreign exchange market make the forward market. The exchange rate settled between the buyers and seller for forward sale and purchase of currency is known as forward exchange rate. How is the foreign exchange rate determined? There is no simple answer to this question. The method of exchange rate determination has been changing over time. It also depends on whether the foreign exchange market is free or controlled, and whether the government adopts a fixed exchange rate system or a flexible exchange rate policy. So, the issue of whether the exchange rate should be determined by the market or fixed by the government is a controversial one. So, in practice now at present, most of the countries have adopted both free and flexible exchange rate policies at some stage in their economic growth. When the monetary authority of a country fixes the exchange rate between the domestic currency and a foreign currency with the provision of fluctuation of the rate within a small upper and lower margin, then it is known as fixed exchange rate. The fixed exchange rate has a long history. During the entire period of gold standard, the exchange rate was fixed and all the currencies of individual nations were pegged to gold. So, however, gold standard broke down during the World War I and remained out of practice until the end of the World War II, and so did the fixed exchange rate system. After the Second World War, the International Monetary Fund was established in 1945 and fixed exchange rate system was revived at that time. And if we talk about flexible exchange rate system, in this system, market forces of demand and supply for foreign exchange or the currency decides the exchange rate. So, at present now most of the countries have adopted the system of flexible exchange rate. Floating exchange rate refers to a system in which foreign exchange rate is determined the market forces of demand and supply and also the intervention of the central bank which influence the exchange rate in the foreign exchange market. So, it is nothing but the hybrid of a fixed exchange rate and a flexible exchange rate system, and the aim is to keep exchange rate close to the desired target values, and this is also known as the dirty floating rate. So, as we have discussed earlier that in flexible exchange rate system, the foreign exchange rate is determined by demand and supply of the foreign exchange derived from the demand for and supply of foreign goods, services and securities respectively. So, the demand for foreign exchange comes from the buyers who need to make some payments abroad in foreign exchange. So, it is a composite of demand for different types of commodities, variety of services and wide range of securities. The other kind of demand comes from the speculators, foreign exchange dealers and the monetary authorities willing to build up their foreign exchange reserves for future payments. So, the demand for foreign exchange generally arises on the commodity imports, that is the most important item, and services rendered by the foreigners, travel expenditure abroad, interest payment and dividend paid on securities owned by the foreigners, remittances and charitable contribution abroad or repayment of loans, government expenditure abroad, export of long-term capital, that is direct investment abroad, loans to foreigners, etc. So, export of short term capital, that is increase in bank balance abroad, gold imports, etc. So, these items being payment made to the foreigners during a specific time period appear in the debit side of the balance of payment account. So, if we look at the demand curve of foreign exchange, then we can see that it is downward sloping, and in the diagram we can see wherein in x-axis, on x-axis we have taken demand for foreign exchange in terms of dollar, and on y-axis we have taken the rate of exchange, and this rate of exchange is price of dollar in terms of rupees. So, it is downward sloping because if rate of exchange increases, then the demand for that currency goes down, because in that case their imports become very costly and other investments also become costly. So, people will prefer less of that currency, and vice versa, like when rate of exchange goes down, then the demand for that currency increases. So, therefore, the demand curve for foreign exchange rate foreign exchange will be downward sloping. A country earns foreign exchange from different sources, resulting in the supply of the foreign exchange. So, the seller of the foreign exchange constitute the supply of the market. So, supply of foreign exchange is derived from a composite supply of various kinds of goods, a variety of services, and a wide range of securities. In addition, foreign exchange supply also comes from speculators, foreign exchange dealers, and monetary authorities trying to get rid of their excess foreign exchange reserves. Supply of foreign exchange of a country being receipts from the foreigners during a specified time appear as in the credit side of the balance sheet. So, these items include like commodity exports, that is the most important item, then services rendered to the foreigners, travel expenditure by foreigners, interest and dividend received on foreign securities, remittances and charitable contribution by the foreigners, loans, borrowings, government expenditure by foreign nations, and imports of long term capital or direct investment, foreign loans, etc., or imports of short term capital, gold exports, etc. So, these are the various sources for the supply of the foreign exchange in the domestic market or the foreign exchange market. So, if we draw the graph of the supply curve of foreign exchange, then we can see that it will be upward sloping, and in this graph we are taking supply of foreign exchange on x-axis and the exchange rate on y-axis. Now, why it is upward sloping? Because if exchange rate increases, then the supply of foreign currency also increases, because then it becomes more profitable and more supply will come in the market. So, therefore, the supply curve is upward sloping. After discussing the demand and supply curve of the foreign exchange, then we can discuss about the equilibrium exchange rate. So, equilibrium rate of exchange is determined at the point of intersection of the demand and supply curve of foreign exchange, as we can see in the diagram. And in the diagram, we can see that at point E, the demand curve and supply curve are intersecting each other, and at point E, the equilibrium exchange rate that is determined is 45.50, and if the exchange rate is less than this point R, that is R dash dash, then there is excess of the demand of foreign exchange, because if rate of exchange is very less, then the demand increases and the supply goes down. So, there will be the excess demand that you can see in the diagram, and if the rate of exchange is more than the R, that is R dash, like 46, then the supply will be more than the demand and there will be excess of supply in the market. Now, excess demand for foreign exchange results in depreciation of the domestic currency, pushing the demand curve and the price of foreign exchange up, and vice versa. So likewise, excess supply of foreign exchange causes appreciation of the domestic currency, shifting right and pulling down the price of the foreign exchange and vice versa. And there are many factors that we have already discussed which affects the exchange rate, like domestic price or domestic inflation, or trade effect, terms of trade effect you can say, or rate of interest, political condition, real income condition, structural changes which can bring in the change in the equilibrium exchange rate in the economy.